Story number 1.
The rain hit the windshield with such force that I could barely see the road ahead of me. I'd been driving for over 14 hours straight, my body aching, my mind numb, but the deadline loomed over me like a shadow. The shipment I was hauling had to reach Denver by sunrise, and the only thing standing between me and the end of the route was the stretch of highway I was currently on, Route 70, somewhere in the middle of nowhere. The highway was empty, not a single car in sight. I flicked on the wipers again, trying to keep the rain from blurring my vision, but it was useless. The road was slick with water, and the truck swayed slightly as I maneuvered through the rainstorm. My eyes were heavy, the fatigue starting to take its toll. I couldn't afford to stop. Not now. I glanced down at the GPS. There was a gas station about 20 miles ahead. I knew it would be a good place to pull over, stretch my legs, and grab a cup of coffee. But then something strange caught my eye, a small dot on the screen, off the beaten path. It wasn't a part of the route I was supposed to be taking. It wasn't marked as a gas station or rest area, just a random location. I almost dismissed it, but the curiosity gnawed at me. I'd been on the road long enough to know that sometimes those odd little places had the best rest stops. Maybe I'd find a diner with hot food and a warm bed. It was worth the detour, especially if it meant getting off the highway for a bit. I made a quick decision and turned onto the dirt road that led to the unknown dot. The truck's wheels kicked up mud and the tires slid a bit as I navigated the path, but I kept going. The rain was coming down harder now, and the sky was nearly pitch black, save for the occasional flash of lightning in the distance. The road twisted and turned through thick trees and shrubbery. It felt like I was in the middle of nowhere, completely isolated. It was strange. I'd been on this stretch of road countless times, but I'd never seen this path before. After what felt like miles, I finally saw it, a small building in the distance. The sign above the door was old and weathered, its paint peeling off in patches. It read, "Riverside Rest Stop," with a faded logo underneath. The lights inside flickered, casting an eerie glow against the rain-soaked ground. The parking lot was empty, save for one other truck parked in the corner. I pulled in and parked next to the other truck, its headlights turned off. There was no sign of the driver, but I figured they were inside. I grabbed my keys, climbed out, and walked toward the building. The door creaked open as I pushed it, and a blast of warm, stale air hit me in the face. The room was small, dimly lit by a single fluorescent bulb. A counter stretched across one side of the room, and a couple of booths were scattered around. The place looked like it had been abandoned for years, yet something about it made me feel uneasy. Behind the counter was a man, his face hidden in shadow. He didn't look up as I walked in, didn't greet me. I stood there for a moment, feeling awkward, before I finally spoke. "Hey, you open?" I asked, my voice breaking the silence. The man slowly looked up. His eyes were sunken, dark circles beneath them. His skin was pale, almost sickly, and his hair hung in wet, stringy strands over his face. He said nothing at first, just stared at me as though he was trying to figure out if I was real. "Yeah, sure," he finally muttered. His voice was raspy, like he hadn't spoken in days. I tried to shake off the uncomfortable feeling crawling up my spine. I needed coffee, a break from the road. I walked up to the counter and set down my keys. "You got any coffee?" I asked, trying to sound casual. The man didn't respond right away. He just looked at me for a long moment before slowly nodding. "In the back," he said, gesturing with one hand toward a door behind him. I didn't want to go back there, but I didn't feel like arguing. I glanced at the door and then at him, trying to decide if I should just leave and get back on the road. But something inside me kept me there. Something urged me to stay. I nodded and walked past him, heading toward the back room. The door creaked open, and I stepped inside. The room was small, filled with old, mismatched furniture and a few dusty shelves. There was a single coffee pot on the counter, steam rising from it in a thick cloud. The smell hit me first, bitter, burned coffee that made my stomach churn, but I needed the caffeine, so I poured myself a cup anyway. I took a sip and immediately regretted it. It tasted like ash. But I drank it anyway, my eyes scanning the room. There was something off about the place, something I couldn't put my finger on. I felt like I was being watched, like the walls themselves were closing in on me. Then I heard it, a faint noise coming from somewhere deeper in the building. A scraping sound. It was soft, but it was there. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. It sounded like something, or someone, was moving around in the back. I slowly put the cup down and turned toward the door. I didn't want to stay here anymore. I didn't want to deal with whatever was making that sound. But before I could leave, I heard the door behind me creak open. I spun around, half expecting to see the man from the counter standing there, but instead I saw something else. A woman. She was standing in the doorway, her back to me. Her hair was long and matted, hanging down in tangled clumps. She wore a torn, dirty dress that clung to her skin like it hadn't been washed in ages. Her hands were thin, almost skeletal, and they hung at her sides, fingers curled slightly as if she were clenching something invisible. She didn't move, didn't speak. She just stood there, staring at the wall in front of her. My first instinct was to leave, but something kept me rooted to the spot. The silence stretched on, thick and uncomfortable. I opened my mouth to speak, but before I could say anything, the woman turned her head slowly toward me. Her eyes were empty, hollow, black pits that seemed to suck the light out of the room. I couldn't look away, and in that instant, I felt something cold wrap around my chest, squeezing the air from my lungs. I tried to take a step back, but my legs wouldn't move. My body was frozen, locked in place. The woman took a step toward me, her head tilting at an unnatural angle, like she was studying me, deciding what to do next. The air around me grew heavier, colder. My skin prickled with the sensation of being watched, of being hunted. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice a rasping, guttural sound that sent a shiver down my spine. "You shouldn't have come here." Before I could respond, the ground beneath me seemed to shift. The walls began to close in, the air growing thicker, suffocating. The woman's eyes widened, and I could hear her breathing, labored, desperate, like she was fighting to speak. The scraping sound returned, louder now. It was coming from everywhere, from the walls, the ceiling, the floor. It felt like the entire building was alive, crawling, shifting around me. I finally managed to break free from the trance and bolted toward the door. I didn't look back, didn't care what was behind me. I needed to get out. I needed to leave that place before it swallowed me whole. I burst out of the back room, the door slamming behind me, and I stumbled into the main room. The man behind the counter was gone. The space was empty. No sign of him, no sign of anyone. Just me, standing in the middle of that awful place. I ran to the front door and shoved it open, rushing back to the truck. My heart was pounding in my chest, my breath ragged. I didn't look back as I jumped into the cab, slammed the door shut, and started the engine. The truck roared to life, and I floored the gas pedal, peeling out of the parking lot. As I drove away, the rain started to ease up, but the strange, overwhelming feeling didn't leave me. It lingered, heavy in my chest. I kept my eyes on the road, not daring to look back. But as I passed the sign for the Riverside rest stop, I saw something in the rearview mirror. The woman. She was standing outside, watching me drive away, her hollow eyes fixed on me, as if she was never going to let me forget what I had seen. Story the end.
Story number 2.
It was early November, just after the time change. You know, that week where 5 p.m. feels like midnight and everything looks like it's dying. I was hauling lumber from Oregon down through the Sierra Nevada, headed to a distribution hub in Bakersfield, a long, winding route. Mountains, tunnels, narrow 2 lanes with no guardrails. I'd driven it before. I knew what to expect. But that trip, something about it never added up. And even now, I still don't understand what really happened out there. I'd picked up the load from a mill outside Klamath Falls, a bunch of rough-cut fir planks stacked and tarped tight. The mill was quiet, mostly automated, and the guy who signed my manifest didn't say much. Just had this pale, sallow look like he hadn't slept in a week. He handed me the clipboard, signed it without even glancing up, and said something that didn't land until later. "You'll want to keep driving through the night. Don't stop near the summit." I thought he was just making a joke about snow or the road conditions, so I nodded, gave him a casual thumbs up, and left. It was only a partial load anyway, nothing that should have made the trailer heavy. But by the time I hit the base of the mountains outside Shasta, the whole rig felt off balance, like something inside the trailer kept shifting. I pulled off to the side to recheck the straps, and everything looked fine. Tensioned, no sag. I even tapped the tarps and heard the right echo. Still, there was this sound. Not the squeak of tires or the metallic shift of a load settling. This was lower, organic, wet. I know how crazy that sounds, but I swear to God, when I stood at the rear of the trailer, I heard something breathing. Slow, like it was asleep, or waiting. I didn't stay there long, just got back in the cab and kept moving. Thought maybe I was tired. Maybe I was imagining things. I usually don't take the old Donner Pass route, but my GPS rerouted me due to some rock slide blocking I-5. That should have been my second red flag. The detour led me off the main highway and onto a road that wasn't well marked. Just a crooked green sign half hanging on a bent metal pole. Briar Hollow Road. Looked more like a logging trail than a state route, but the GPS said it would shave off 2 hours, so I went for it. About 20 miles in, the trees thickened, crowding the edges of the road. Pines and firs packed together so tightly they blocked out the moonlight. I kept the brights on, but even then, visibility was garbage. Snow started falling around 11 p.m., not heavy, but steady, and the road began to ice over. No other vehicles, not a single set of headlights behind or ahead. It was like I was the only person stupid enough to be driving through those woods. That's when I saw the first figure. At first, I thought it was a deer. I tapped the brakes, squinting through the windshield, but it wasn't a deer. It was a person, standing dead center in the road. Tall, gaunt, naked, just standing there, staring at me. I leaned on the horn and slowed down to a crawl. The figure didn't move. It didn't even flinch. Its skin looked wrong, slick and pale, like it was covered in ice or had been pulled from a lake. I got close enough to see its eyes. They were pitch black, no whites, just glossy holes. And then it stepped off the road, straight into the woods. Not walking, gliding. I don't know how else to explain it. I didn't stop. I wasn't about to. But after that, I noticed the smell. Rotten wood and wet dog. It filled the cab like the heater was sucking in the stench from outside. I rolled the windows up tight, checked the vents. Nothing helped. Then the sound came back, muffled breathing like before. Only this time, it was louder and closer. I turned off the radio, sat in silence, listening. The breathing was coming from behind me, inside the cab, the sleeper area. I had a flashlight stashed in the console. Grabbed it, flipped it on, and twisted around in my seat to look into the sleeper. No one. Nothing. Just my bedroll, my duffel bag, and the curtain pulled halfway shut. I reached back and yanked the curtain open, empty. But I swear to you, just before I moved the fabric, I saw it shift. Like something was hiding back there, trying not to breathe too loud. I didn't pull over. I couldn't. Every instinct screamed at me to keep driving. I passed a mile marker around 12:30 a.m., the only one I saw for an hour. It was carved into wood instead of the usual green reflective metal. Mile 13, it read, painted in red. A nail was driven into the top of it with something dangling from it, what looked like a rabbit's foot. Only it was too big, human-sized. About 10 minutes later, the road curved sharply along the side of a cliff. No guardrail, no warning signs. The snow was thicker now and visibility down to maybe 10 feet. That's when the headlights flickered. First the left one, then both. Then the entire dash went black. Engine still running, but all electronics gone. Then I heard the knock from inside the trailer. 3 slow, deliberate knocks right against the wall of the cab. Not something falling or shifting. Something knocking. Something that knew I was listening. I didn't check. I didn't stop. I just kept going, heart pounding so hard I thought I was going to stroke out. And then suddenly, lights. Bright, yellow-white. A truck stop. Right off the road. I almost wept. I pulled in, braked hard, and slammed the gear into park. The lights came back on. The dashboard lit up. The headlights stabilized. I looked around. One lonely diner. A gas pump that looked like it hadn't worked since the 80s. And a rusted sign swinging in the wind, "Welcome to Holler's Pit." There was one other rig parked there, red Freightliner. No one in the cab. I walked inside the diner, hoping to grab coffee, shake the fear off. The bell above the door rang, but no one looked up. 4 patrons sat at the counter. All of them stared ahead, motionless. Not eating, not drinking, just sitting. I cleared my throat. "Hey, y'all open?" No one responded. Then I saw the waitress, standing behind the counter, facing away. Her hands were gripping the edge of the sink so tightly her knuckles were white. I said louder, "Miss?" She turned her head slowly, like it hurt. Her eyes were gone. Just 2 empty sockets, black and wet, like something had hollowed them out. She opened her mouth and let out this dry, broken sound. Not a scream, not a whisper, just noise. I ran. Didn't even grab my coffee. Back in the cab, I peeled out so fast the back tires fishtailed on the ice. As I glanced in the mirror, I saw all 4 patrons rise and walk out of the diner. Same pace, same stiff movements, like they were puppets on strings. I got back on the road and didn't look back. Drove through until sunrise, heart thumping, eyes aching, bladder screaming. By the time I rolled into Bakersfield, the sky was peach-colored and the mountains were far behind. I pulled into the yard, signed off the manifest, and backed the trailer into the designated dock. That's when the yard manager came out, looking confused. "You sure this is the right trailer?" I nodded, showed him the paperwork. He frowned and opened the back. There was no lumber, just dirt. Packed earth, like someone had filled the trailer with shovelfuls of soil. The tarp was there, but torn, shredded like claws had ripped through it. And in the middle of the dirt, half buried, was a wooden mask. Carved, primitive, with black stones in place of eyes. The yard manager cursed and backed away. I stood there, shaking, trying to make sense of it. They called the police, filed a report, investigated theft, searched my GPS logs, interviewed me 3 separate times. No one could figure out how or when the load disappeared. I showed them the route I took, Briar Hollow Road. They stared at me. "There's no such road on the map," one of the officers said. I pulled out my GPS. The route was gone, history wiped clean, no trace of the detour. No sign of Holler's Pit, no record of the alternate path. They let me go eventually, but I could feel it. They thought I was lying or insane. My company put me on unpaid leave. Later, they let me go quietly. No reason given. Since then, I've gotten a few calls from other drivers, guys I've worked with over the years. All of them say the same thing. Weird roads, breathing cargo, something knocking from inside the trailer. Each story ends the same way. You'll want to keep driving through the night, they say. Don't stop near the summit. Story the end.
Story number 3.
I've had plenty of strange runs in my years hauling freight, but there's one night that never sits right, no matter how many years stack between me and it. I was running solo, hauling reefer from a warehouse in Laredo, Texas, to a cold storage facility up in Iowa. The route was mostly straight and simple, no detours, no mountains, just a lot of long stretches of nothing. The load was light, just processed meats. Frozen blocks wrapped in plastic. You wouldn't think anything about that could make your skin crawl. But something about that night, it changed the way I look at the open road. I left Laredo around 6 p.m. It was still hot as hell, even in October. That part of Texas doesn't believe in fall. I made good time, cruising up I-35, passing San Antonio and Austin without much traffic. I figured I'd push hard through the night, stop to nap somewhere north of Dallas before sunup. I'd done the route before, same customer, same timeline. But this time, things went off. It started small. Around 1 a.m., I was just north of Waco when I started getting a weird smell in the cab. At first, I thought maybe the reefer wasn't holding temp right and something was going bad, but the gauges were steady, minus 22, locked in. Still, the smell didn't go away. It wasn't rotten meat exactly, more like wet carpet and mildew mixed with a sour chemical tang, like something had leaked into the air system. I pulled over at a Love's to check the reefer. Everything was working. No signs of a spill, no condensation buildup, nothing. But the smell was stronger outside the cab than in. It seemed to be coming from the trailer itself. I thought maybe something had gone bad before it was frozen, but that didn't make sense. Still, I closed it up and got back on the road, figuring I'd file a complaint with the warehouse once I delivered. About 30 miles north, my trailer lights started flickering, just for a few seconds at first, enough that I noticed it in the mirrors, but not long enough to think it was serious. I figured maybe a loose wire. Happens sometimes, especially when you're bouncing over rough patches. But then my dash lights started acting up too. Not flickering exactly, more like they dimmed, then surged. The GPS restarted itself twice. I radioed on the CB, seeing if anyone nearby was having electrical issues. Got no answer. That's when the voice started. I keep my radio on low, mostly background noise, weather updates, trucker banter. But suddenly, it cut to static, then a faint voice came through. Female, soft, like she was whispering right in my ear. "Stop the truck." I froze. Thought maybe it was a prank, some rogue signal bouncing in. I turned the radio down, checked my phone, no calls, nothing open. Just me, the road, and that voice stuck in my head. Then it came again, clearer this time. Please, stop. He's in the back. I pulled over hard onto the shoulder. My hands were shaking. I grabbed the flashlight and jumped out. The reefer was humming along, nothing abnormal, but the smell was worse, stronger than before. My stomach turned as I approached the rear doors. I unlocked them and swung both wide. Freezing mist spilled out. The cold hit me like a wall. Inside, everything looked normal. Rows of shrink-wrapped pallets, frost clinging to the floor. I stepped up onto the bumper, scanning my light across the interior. Nothing moved, but there were marks on the frost, finger streaks. Not big ones either. Thin, child-sized, traced along the inside wall like someone had dragged their hand as they walked by. I jumped back and slammed the doors shut, locked them, and stood there in the dark, the smell still lingering in the air, my pulse racing. There was no kid in that trailer. I'd checked the seal at the warehouse. I'd been with the truck the whole time. Still, I climbed into the cab, locked the doors, and sat there with the engine idling, trying to get my breathing under control. I considered calling the police, but what would I say? I think there's a ghost in my trailer. I needed the delivery to go through. I needed the check. So I convinced myself it was nothing. Some trick of condensation, some guy at the warehouse messing around. Maybe even just my mind playing games on me from too much caffeine and not enough sleep. I drove on. Somewhere near Denton, the fog rolled in. It was thick. I've driven through plenty of it before, but this stuff clung to the windshield like it was alive. Like it was alive. My high beams just bounced off it. I slowed to 30 and kept my hazards on. There were no other cars, no headlights in either direction, just the low hum of the engine and the thick white pressing in. Then the knocking started. Not from outside, from inside the cab. 3 slow taps, right behind my seat. I snapped around and stared into the sleeper. Empty. But the knocking came again, softer this time, from the floor vent like someone was tapping it from the other side. I stopped the truck again, got out, looked under the chassis, around the undercarriage, even inside the toolboxes. Nothing. No animals, no damage. Everything looked fine, but the smell... God, it was back, stronger now, like mold and old blood. When I climbed back in, the windshield was fogged up from the inside. I wiped it with my sleeve, and that's when I saw it, a handprint. On the passenger side window. Small. Perfectly formed. Pressed from the inside. I stared at it for a long time before starting the truck again. I didn't care what it was anymore. I just needed to get moving. Needed to be in the daylight. I didn't stop again until I hit Oklahoma. I pulled into a small truck stop off the highway, one of those old places with a single diner and 3 fuel pumps. I got coffee, tried to settle my nerves, told myself I was just worn out. But when I came back to the truck, I noticed something new. The back trailer door was open, not wide, just a crack, an inch, maybe 2. The lock was still hanging from the latch. I'd locked it myself. I was sure of it. I swung the doors open again. The cold rushed out, stinging my face, and the smell, now it was rotting meat, clear and strong. I scanned the inside again. Nothing looked moved. But the frost was different now. There were footprints, small, bare feet. They led between 2 of the pallets, turned, then vanished. I shut the doors, locked them, and went inside the truck stop to call dispatch. I told them I had reefer trouble, maybe contamination, that the trailer might be compromised. They said to push through anyway and deliver, then let the receiver file a complaint if needed. No one wanted to eat the cost of a spoiled shipment. Back on the road, I felt sick. Not from the smell, but from the feeling that I wasn't alone anymore. The CB was dead silent. My phone stopped getting signal north of Ardmore and never came back. The fog returned, thicker than ever. It clung to the road like wet sheets. I passed the same mile marker twice in 20 minutes. Something was wrong with time. Then the voice came back. He took them all. It was coming from the trailer. I could hear it through the back wall. A whisper, maybe a dozen voices all layered together. Children, women, crying, then silence. I floored it. Didn't stop again until I crossed into Kansas. As the fog lifted, the landscape returned. The sun started to rise. I dared to believe I'd imagined it all. But when I pulled into a rest area to check the reefer before the final leg, the doors were open again. Not just ajar this time, fully swung wide, and the inside was empty. No pallets, no boxes, just frost and blood, smeared across the floor in strange shapes like symbols. circles and lines I didn't recognize. In the center, a single handprint, tiny like the one on the window, but this one was in black, not paint, not ink. It was still wet. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. My brain screamed to call the cops, but something told me not to. I slammed the doors shut and just drove. I didn't stop until I got to the receiver in Iowa. When I backed into the dock and opened the trailer, it was full again. Perfectly stacked pallets of frozen meat, still sealed, still frosted. The worker at the dock took one look and waved it through, signed the bill of lading and walked off. No questions. I left fast, didn't even shut the trailer doors before hitting the lot. Back at home a few days later, I got a letter. No return address. Inside was a photo. Black and white, grainy. It showed my truck parked in the fog, headlights off, rear doors wide open, and standing at the back, 3 figures. Barefoot, small, faceless. On the back of the photo, in smudged handwriting, it said, "He only keeps the quiet ones." I never drove that route again, but some nights I swear I hear knocking under the bed of my sleeper cab. 3 taps, soft and patient. Story, the end.
Story number 4.
I'd been driving rigs for almost 20 years by the time this happened, and I've seen just about everything out there. Sleep-deprived jackknifes, lightning strikes in the middle of nowhere, a guy driving a Prius with a goat in the passenger seat, but nothing ever got under my skin, like what happened on that delivery to Montana. This was back in the spring of 2019. I was hauling a load of industrial copper wiring from El Paso to a construction site in Great Falls. They were building some kind of large electrical substation up there. The load was simple, spooled copper coils, each one shrink-wrapped and strapped down on pallets. The kind of haul where you don't expect anything weird. Just long roads, rest stops, and maybe a podcast or two. The trip started smooth. I left Texas on a Tuesday afternoon, cleared New Mexico by sunset, and pulled into a truck stop near Raton Pass just after midnight to grab a few hours of sleep. The only odd thing I noticed on the first leg was that I kept seeing the same silver station wagon. No plates. Just a long, dusty hood and one broken headlight. I passed it around Roswell, then again just outside of Trinidad, and once more when I stopped to refuel in Pueblo. I figured it was coincidence, maybe some paranoid local who didn't want to be tracked. Still, it stuck in my mind. By Thursday morning, I was deep into Wyoming. Route 287 took me through a lot of flat nothingness, ranch fences, skeletal trees, and the occasional leaning barn off in the fields. I stopped at a Sinclair near Rollins for fuel and coffee, and that's when I noticed something strange. One of the trailer door latches was loose. It wasn't unlocked, just unlatched. The padlock was still there, swinging slightly in the wind. I stood there a minute, trying to remember if I'd checked it during my walk-around at the last stop. I always do, but sleep deprivation messes with your memory. I told myself it was probably just me. I resecured it and got back in the cab, not thinking much of it. That night, I found a quiet pull-off near the Bighorn Mountains, just before the Montana border. No formal truck stop, just a gravel patch with enough room for maybe 2 or 3 rigs to park. I was alone. I backed in and left the engine idling to keep the cab warm, then climbed into the sleeper to get some rest. That's when I heard something underneath the floor. At first, I thought it was road expansion noises, those little creaks and pings the chassis makes when it cools. But this wasn't metal shifting. This was rhythmic, a soft tapping, then a scrape, like nails. 3 quick taps, a pause, then something like a dragging sound. I sat up and turned off the engine. The cab went dead quiet. I listened hard, trying to pick up any sound from outside. Nothing. Then I heard it again. 3 taps, faster now, from directly beneath where I was sitting. I bolted out of the sleeper and opened the door. Cold mountain air hit me. I grabbed my flashlight, stepped out, and dropped to my knees to check under the cab. My boots crunched on the gravel. I swept the light under the chassis, nothing but road grime and the occasional spiderweb. I stood up, uneasy, walked back to the trailer, thinking maybe some animal had crawled inside. When I reached the doors, the smell hit me. Not strong, not overwhelming, just the faintest whiff of rot. It was to make my skin crawl. The copper wiring inside shouldn't smell like anything but plastic wrap and grease. I climbed up on the bumper and checked the padlock again. Still secure. But something about the air leaking from the crack between the doors, it felt warm. Wrong. I pressed my ear to the metal and listened. There was breathing. Not mechanical, not hissing, breathing, slow and ragged like someone asleep. I leapt back, heart racing. Scanned the area. No cars, no footprints, no one in sight. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Just sat in the cab with the engine off, window cracked, listening. At some point just before dawn, I saw something move in my side mirror. Not in the mirror itself, behind it. A shape, hunched and low like a crouched person peering around the edge. I whipped around, but there was nothing there. When I turned back, the mirror was fogged. Not from dew, from breath. I left as soon as the sky started to brighten, not even bothering with breakfast. I needed to drop the load, collect my money, and be done with it. About 2 hours outside of Great Falls, the CB lit up. A crackle, then static, then a voice. Unit 7-3, you've got a leak. I looked down at my unit number sticker. I was 7-3, but I hadn't been using the CB. No one had. I clicked the receiver. Who is this? Static. Then the voice again, different tone this time. Hollow. He's not asleep anymore. I stopped using the radio after that. I shut it off completely. Every bone in my body told me to get the hell to the drop point and ditch the whole rig. I arrived at the site around 2 p.m., Friday, a big empty lot behind a chain-link fence with some prefab trailers acting as offices and a few forklifts. A guy in a yellow vest waved me in. He had a clipboard and looked bored out of his mind. Copper load? He asked. Yeah, from El Paso. He checked the manifest and gave me a nod. Back her up to Bay 3. We'll unload. You can sleep in the yard if you need. I started to back into the bay when one of the laborers came jogging out from the warehouse, waving his arms. The guy with the clipboard turned, annoyed, and they started talking in hushed tones. I stepped out of the cab and walked over. What's going on? I asked. The clipboard guy turned to me, looking pale. Did you check your cargo recently? Not since last night. He looked back at the warehouse. There's something wrong with the load. They asked me to open it up myself. I went to the back, unlocked the padlock, and swung the doors wide. The inside was empty. No copper. No pallets. Just deep scratch marks on the floor and walls. Parallel lines like something had been dragged out or had clawed its way through. There were dark stains on the metal like dried blood and something blacker. And carved into the interior wall near the floor were the words, "He rides with whoever looks away first." We stared in silence. One of the laborers started retching behind me. The guy with the clipboard called his supervisor. The police were involved within an hour. They questioned me for 6 hours. Where'd the copper go? Why was there blood? Why didn't I report anything? They even searched the cab, the sleeper, under the rig, the whole nine. Nothing. No fingerprints, no signs of tampering. The load had been logged at the pickup warehouse. We confirmed the serial numbers. It had been there, but it vanished. They detained me overnight. I called my dispatcher and tried to explain what happened. He sounded more annoyed than concerned. Said it sounded like a scam. Maybe someone intercepted the load and I was making up stories to cover my ass. They let me go the next morning, but I could tell they weren't convinced. A week later, I got a message from the company. Suspended indefinitely. No pay. No explanation. I tried to move on. Took a job driving shuttle vans for a while. Smaller vehicles, city routes, nothing that would put me on empty highways after dark. But it didn't stop. Every few months, I'd get a letter in the mail. No return address. Just a photo inside. The first was my truck, parked outside the yard in Great Falls, the cab door wide open. In the photo, there's a shape sitting in the driver's seat. Humanoid, but not quite right. Limbs too long, head tilted unnaturally. No face. The next photo came a month later. It was my apartment, taken from outside. Nighttime. The window to my bedroom, half open. In the photo, a silhouette is standing by the bed, watching me sleep. I moved the next day. The third photo came 6 weeks after that. A gas station I'd never seen before. My old rig was parked at one of the pumps. Trailer doors open. A man in a yellow vest slumped on the ground, blood pooling around his chest. The thing standing over him, blurry, like it couldn't be fully captured, was dragging something out of the trailer. I took the photo to the police. They said it was photoshopped, that there was no evidence of the person in the vest being real, that I was probably experiencing stress-induced hallucinations, but I knew what I saw. I started looking into the original warehouse, the one in El Paso. It took some digging, but I finally got hold of a former employee who'd worked there for 5 years before the copper job. He agreed to meet under the condition I didn't record him. He told me the warehouse used to be a military storage facility. Decades ago, back in the 60s, they'd stored something there, something, and it had been buried under layers of paperwork ever since. The copper shipment? Just a way to get it out. The coils were real, but buried deep between them, wrapped in black canvas, was a container. He didn't know what was inside, just that it moved sometimes, and that the manifest warned not to stop driving once the load was sealed. Don't stop, don't open, don't look in the mirrors. I asked him who wrote that warning. He looked me dead in the eyes and said, "They never told us, just that the last guy who broke protocol, he drove straight into a canyon wall at 80. When they found him, he was still alive. No eyes, no tongue, still whispering." I left that meeting and didn't speak to anyone for a week. Every mirror in my house is covered now. Every night I hear the soft tapping at the windows. 3 taps, a pause, then a scrape. I haven't driven long haul since, but sometimes late at night when the wind's just right, I can hear the hum of a reefer unit and someone breathing just behind the wall. Story the end.
Story number 5.
I've been a long-haul trucker for close to 16 years, seen a lot, heard more, and there are some stretches of highway that have their own kind of silence, the kind that presses on your chest and crawls down your spine. People think the open road is freedom. Sometimes it is. But freedom can be a lonely, unpredictable thing, especially at night, especially out in the middle of nowhere. I don't scare easy, and I've never been one for ghost stories, but there's one trip that never left me. Not even after all these years. It started out like any other haul. I was driving a reefer, carrying frozen goods from Omaha to Reno. It was mid-November, and the weather was decent, but cold enough to bite when you stepped outside. The route was one I'd done more times than I could count, but this time, dispatch routed me down a less familiar state road to save time. Highway 93, running deep through Nevada, the kind of road where gas stations vanish and you start to wonder if the world forgot this place ever existed. I wasn't thrilled, but the miles didn't bother me. I stocked up on fuel, grabbed a coffee, and hit the road just before sunset. The highway stretched like a ribbon of dull gray through open desert, the horizon flat and endless. I was about 6 hours in when the sun dipped behind the hills and darkness swallowed the landscape. No lights. No towns, just the occasional reflector blinking in my high beams and the monotonous hum of tires rolling over cracked asphalt. Around 11:30 p.m., I passed a faded sign that read, "Parker's Junction, 18 miles." I remembered seeing that name on an old CB forum, supposedly a rest stop that used to serve miners back in the day. The name sounded like something out of an old Western, but I didn't care. My eyes were burning, and my back felt like it had been welded into the seat. I needed a place to stop, stretch, maybe catch a few hours of sleep before finishing the haul. The turnoff was barely visible. Gravel cracked beneath my tires as I pulled into what looked like a forgotten parking lot. The lights on the lot pole flickered, buzzing faintly like dying insects. A rusted-out building stood to the right, what must have once been a diner or fuel station. The sign had long since rotted, and the windows were dark and broken. But a couple of rigs were parked at the far end of the lot, dim figures inside them visible through windows, their cabins softly lit. It gave me enough comfort to park my Freightliner and kill the engine. I leaned back, checked the doors, and reclined in my sleeper. Just as I was closing my eyes, something hit the side of my trailer. Not a bump, not a thud, more like a dragging scrape, like metal against metal. I sat up, every nerve on alert. At first, I figured it was wind or a loose strap flapping, but the air was dead still. No movement. No sound now. I grabbed my flashlight and opened the door. Cold desert wind nipped at my face as I stepped out. The lot was empty except for the 2 other trucks. I walked around my trailer, scanning the ground and the side panels. That's when I saw the mark, 3 parallel scratches, each about a foot long, etched into the aluminum. Deep, too. Not the kind of thing a branch or a loose chain would do. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the gouges, feeling that silence press in again. Not even crickets. The desert wasn't just quiet. It was dead. I turned my light toward the other trucks, but no one stirred. Their lights were off now. Cabins dark, like they'd never been on at all. Back in my rig, I locked the doors and kept the flashlight beside me. Sleep didn't come easy. My eyes kept flicking open at every creak or groan. Around 2 a.m., I heard it again, scraping, slower this time, like whatever it was knew I was listening. I sat up, heart racing, and caught a movement in the side mirror, just a flicker of something pale, crouched low by my rear wheels. Too big for an animal, too fast for a person. I didn't even think. I turned the key, fired the engine, and slammed it into drive. Gravel spit behind me as I lurched back onto the highway, tires howling against the road. The adrenaline didn't wear off for hours. I kept checking the mirrors like whatever it was had grabbed onto my trailer and was riding along. By sunrise, I was pulling into a truck stop just outside Ely. The lot was bustling. Truckers fueling up, grabbing breakfast, chatting in groups. I must have looked like hell. I walked into the diner and ordered coffee, still shaking slightly. An older driver with a worn-out ball cap sat down across from me uninvited. "You look like you saw a ghost," he said, sipping his own mug. I didn't respond right away. Then, because I needed to tell someone, I told him what happened. He didn't flinch, just nodded slowly and said, "Parker's Junction." "You know it?" He leaned in, lowering his voice. "Used to be a real place. Miners would pass through, like you said, but back in the 70s, a bunch of truckers started vanishing there. No wreckage, no calls, just disappeared. Folks said it was just the desert. People get lost, dehydrated, but one guy made it out, said he parked there, same as you, middle of the night. Woke up to something scraping on his cab, said it wasn't human." I laughed nervously, but he didn't smile. Said it had too many joints in its legs, moved wrong, pale skin, almost translucent. And the eyes, he paused. No light in them, just holes. "Come on," I muttered. "I don't care if you believe me," he said, standing up. "But I don't stop there anymore. No one does, not if they know better." He walked out, leaving me staring into my coffee. I chalked it up to desert madness. Maybe he was messing with me. Maybe I'd been too tired and imagined the whole thing. That's what I told myself, at least, until it happened again. 2 months later, different route, Idaho to Tucson. Another backroad shortcut, another late night. I wasn't thinking about Parker's Junction anymore, just driving, counting mile markers, watching the gas gauge drop. It was just past midnight when I saw a truck pulled off to the side, hazards blinking. Normally I'd stop. It's a code among truckers. You see one of your own stranded, you help. But something in my gut told me to keep moving. The cab was dark, engine silent, no movement. I slowed down, passed it slowly. As I did, I glanced into the driver's side window. There was someone inside, but they weren't in the seat. They were curled up on the passenger floor, mouth wide open like they died mid-scream, arms bent at impossible angles. Their eyes, God help me, were pitch black, like sockets scooped out. And crouched over them halfway in the cab was that same pale shape I'd seen in my mirror months earlier. Long limbs, knees bending the wrong way, skin like wax. Its head jerked toward me, and for one awful second, I saw its face. No nose, just slits. A wide mouth full of needle teeth, and eyes, or not eyes, just gaping black pits. I floored it, didn't care about the speed, didn't care about tickets or damage. I just needed to get away. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the wheel. Every minute felt like an hour. I didn't stop until I hit a lit, full truck stop with cameras and people. I parked, turned off the engine, and sat there for hours. Eventually, I called dispatch, told them I was delayed, didn't explain, couldn't. That was 3 years ago. I never took a back road again. Never drive at night unless I have to. I've heard rumors, other drivers whisper about the same thing. Some call it the pale thing. Others say it's a desert spirit, a demon. One guy said it's drawn to lonely places where people forget the land ever mattered. A year later, I met another trucker in Oregon. He'd heard my story through the grapevine. He told me his own. He'd stopped near an abandoned rail line in New Mexico, middle of the night, heard tapping on his trailer, looked out and saw nothing. Then he saw his own door handle jiggle, like something trying to get in. He drove off too. Fast. The stories are always the same. Scraping, pale skin, black eyes, wrong movement. Whatever it is, it's still out there. I haven't seen it since that second time, but I know others have. Some don't make it out. Some trucks are found weeks later, doors wide open, cargo untouched. No blood, no signs of struggle, just empty. I've tried telling myself it's just a shared hallucination, mass hysteria. But every time I see a rig on the side of the road, I wonder. Every time I park in the middle of nowhere, I can feel it. just behind the tree line or under the trailer, waiting. So if you're ever out there, hauling alone at night on a back road with no cell signal, and you hear something scraping against your trailer, don't look. Don't go outside, and for the love of God, don't stop. Story the end.
Story number 6.
I had been driving trucks for most of my life. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, and it was the kind of job that didn't require much thought. Day in and day out, it was just me, the road, and the endless stretch of highway that seemed to go on forever. I've been through the worst weather, driven through storms, fog, and snow, and I've had my fair share of close calls, but nothing ever really rattled me. It was just part of the job. Until one night, something happened that made me question everything I thought I knew about the road. It started on a late-night haul. I was driving through New Mexico, heading east toward Amarillo. The load was a standard delivery. Nothing special, just some machinery. I'd picked it up in Tucson and had already been on the road for 12 hours. I wasn't tired, but I was getting to that point where you're not quite asleep, but not quite awake either. It's that hazy state where the road becomes a blur and you start to lose track of time. I knew I had a few hours before I would need to stop and rest, so I pushed on. The moon was high in the sky, casting an eerie light over the empty stretches of highway, the kind of emptiness you only get in the middle of nowhere. No towns, no lights, just the sound of my truck's engine and the hum of the tires on the asphalt. The kind of quiet that could drive a man mad if he wasn't careful. As I passed mile marker 187, I saw something up ahead. It was a figure standing at the side of the road. At first, I thought it was just a mirage, maybe a sign or some kind of roadside memorial, but then it started moving. It was a woman, walking slowly along the shoulder of the highway. Her long hair was blowing in the wind, and she wore a white dress that seemed to glow in the moonlight. I slowed down as I got closer, unsure what to make of her. There were no other cars on the road, no rest stops, nothing. Just her. She looked out of place, like she didn't belong in this desolate place. My instincts told me to drive past and keep going, but something made me stop. I couldn't explain it. Maybe it was the way she moved, like she was lost, or maybe it was the loneliness of the road, but I found myself pulling over to the side of the highway. I rolled down the window and called out to her. "Hey, are you all right?" She didn't respond. She just kept walking, her bare feet barely making a sound on the gravel. I watched her for a moment, waiting for her to look at me, but she never did. Her gaze was fixed straight ahead, as if she couldn't hear me. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I told myself I was just tired. I had to be. I reached over and grabbed my CB radio, ready to call into dispatch. But before I could speak, I saw the woman stop. She turned her head toward me, but not like a normal person would. It was slow, unnaturally slow, and her face was pale, almost as if the moonlight had drained all the color from her skin. Her eyes were dark, wide, and empty, like two black holes staring back at me. For a moment, I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. It was like my body froze, locked in place. I couldn't understand why she was just standing there, staring at me with those cold, lifeless eyes. Then, without a word, she turned back toward the road and started walking again. I didn't think. I didn't question it. I just hit the gas and drove off, pushing the pedal to the floor, trying to get away from that woman, from that feeling of wrongness that had settled in my chest. I didn't look back. The miles seemed to pass in a blur. I focused on the road, trying to shake the image of her face from my mind. I told myself it was nothing, that I was just imagining things, that it was the exhaustion getting to me. But as I drove, I started to notice something strange. The truck's lights, which had been shining brightly on the road ahead, seemed to flicker. At first, I thought it was just a bad connection, a glitch in the wiring, but the flickering didn't stop. It grew worse, like the lights were fighting against the darkness, struggling to stay lit. I reached for the switch to turn them off and back on, but as soon as I did, the entire dashboard went dark. The radio died, the GPS turned off, and the only thing I could hear was the sound of the wind howling outside. I swore under my breath and pulled over to the shoulder. My hands were shaking as I tried to restart the truck, but it wouldn't turn over. I kept twisting the key, but the engine refused to start. Panic crept up my spine, and for the first time in years, I felt the familiar knot of fear tighten in my chest. I was alone, in the middle of nowhere, with no cell service and no way to get help. I got out of the truck, my flashlight in hand, and walked around to the front. The truck seemed fine. No flat tires, no visible damage, but something felt off. The air was still, too still, like everything had frozen in time. I checked the engine compartment, but everything looked normal. I leaned down to check the batteries when I heard it. The sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate steps coming from behind me. I spun around, but no one was there. My heart hammered in my chest as I scanned the empty road. There was nothing, just the desolate stretch of highway that seemed to stretch on forever. But the footsteps didn't stop. They were closer now, just behind me, and I could feel the weight of them, like someone was standing just over my shoulder, breathing down my neck. I grabbed my flashlight and swung it around, but again, there was nothing. The road was empty. The night still. The only sound, my ragged breathing. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaky. "Is anyone there?" There was no answer, just the sound of footsteps growing louder, closer. My blood ran cold. I turned and ran back to the truck, my flashlight clutched tightly in my hand. My mind raced with possibilities. Was it a prank? Some kind of sick joke? But I knew deep down that it wasn't. I could feel it in my bones. I jumped into the cab, slammed the door shut, and locked it. My hands were shaking as I tried the ignition again. This time, the truck roared to life, and the dashboard lit up. The lights flickered, but they stayed on. I didn't wait another second. I threw the truck into gear and sped off down the road, my eyes constantly scanning the mirrors, expecting to see someone, or something, following me. The road seemed to stretch on forever. The darkness outside felt suffocating, and no matter how fast I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The footsteps had stopped, but I could still feel them, as if they were echoing inside my mind. It wasn't until I reached the next town that I stopped. My hands were still trembling, and I was so exhausted that I could barely think straight. I parked at a truck stop, took a deep breath, and tried to calm myself. The place was nearly empty, save for a few other trucks scattered across the lot. I walked into the diner, hoping a hot meal would clear my head. The waitress behind the counter gave me a polite smile as I sat down. "You okay?" she asked, her voice soft. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I chuckled weakly, trying to shake the lingering fear. "I guess I just got a little spooked." She didn't seem convinced, but she didn't press it. Instead, she just nodded and walked away. I ordered my meal and tried to relax, but my mind kept drifting back to that woman. Her eyes, the footsteps. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something unnatural. I don't know what it was, but I do know one thing. I won't be driving that stretch of road again. Not ever. Story the end.
Story number 7.
It was supposed to be a routine overnight haul. Nothing special. Just a shipment of engine parts from Amarillo to Bakersfield. A route I'd driven dozens of times before. I'd done the math. It'd take me about 22 hours if I cut down my brakes and didn't get caught up at the way stations. I was pushing close to my deadline, and I didn't want to miss the drop-off. I was running on barely 3 hours of sleep when I hit I-40 westbound at dusk, the sun dipping below the edge of the Texas plains behind me. The first few hours were uneventful. I passed a few other rigs and the usual parade of late-night cruisers, all trying to shave time off their own clocks. The night stretched out, black and lonely. I always kept the cab cold to stay alert, and I had my usual thermos full of strong gas station coffee sitting beside me. I flicked on my CB radio out of habit, though it had been mostly silent that night. Around midnight, somewhere past Tucumcari, the road started to feel different. Not bad, exactly, just off. Sparse fog began to creep in across the desert, which wasn't unusual for that stretch in colder weather, but something about it unsettled me. It was the way it moved, not rolling, not drifting. It clung to the asphalt like oil. It didn't seem to move even when I drove through it. I turned the volume up on my radio just to fill the silence. Some static crackled through, followed by a low, muttering voice. I couldn't make out what it said. The frequency sounded garbled. I tried to adjust the tuner, but it kept cutting in and out. "Breaker, any ears on?" I asked into the CB, my voice slightly shaky. Silence. Then the muttering again, closer this time, more distinct. "He sees, he waits." The voice didn't sound like any trucker I'd ever heard. It was old, croaky, whispering like dry leaves in wind. I snapped the radio off, telling myself it was just interference or some kid playing with a base station out in the sticks. I kept driving. At around 2:15 a.m., I pulled off at a rest area near the Arizona border to stretch and relieve myself. The place was dead quiet. Just one other rig parked near the far end, no lights on in the cab. I glanced at it as I stepped out. The trailer was old, rusted at the seams, looked abandoned. Honestly, I walked to the restroom, the cold night air stinging my face. Inside, the lights flickered overhead. One of the urinals had something black smeared around the rim, maybe old grease or mold. I didn't want to get close enough to find out. I used the far stall and tried to shake the strange tension I was feeling, the kind of pressure that crawls up your spine for no reason. When I came back outside, I noticed the other rig's cab door was open. I swear it had been closed just a few minutes ago. I stopped and stared. My own footsteps on the gravel were the only sound. No wind, no insects, no distant hum of freeway traffic. I strained to see if anyone was inside the truck, but the cab was dark. Still, the door swung slightly like someone had just climbed in or out. I climbed back into my own cab and locked the doors. I pulled out of the rest area, trying to keep my eyes on the road, but the feeling of being watched never left. I kept glancing in my mirrors. Nothing, just empty black highway stretching behind me. Still, that feeling stayed with me like a second skin. Around 3:45 a.m., I saw lights flashing up ahead. Hazards. A small sedan was pulled off to the shoulder. I slowed as I approached and saw the driver standing outside, waving. He was a young guy, mid-20s maybe, with dark hair and a frantic look in his eyes. Against my better judgment, I pulled over and rolled down the passenger window. "You okay?" I called out. He ran up to the door. "Please," he gasped. "My car just died. I've got no signal. I've been out here for over an hour." I glanced around. No other vehicles. Still that fog, thicker now, hanging low like a blanket. "I can radio in or give you a lift to the next gas station," I offered. He looked harmless enough, just scared. He nodded eagerly and climbed in. I noticed he had no jacket, just a thin t-shirt despite the cold. He smelled like sweat and dirt, and his hands were trembling. "Thanks, man," he muttered. I didn't know what else to do. It just shut off, like the battery died and everything at the same time. I nodded. "Happens out here. Long stretches, bad cell service, car trouble. You're lucky I came by." He nodded but kept glancing behind us like he expected something to follow. "Where are you heading?" I asked. "Flagstaff," he said. "You mind just dropping me somewhere with a phone?" I said sure. We rode in silence for a bit, then I noticed he hadn't stopped watching the rear view. "You okay?" I asked. He looked at me, his face pale. "Did you see it? Back there?" "See what?" His voice dropped to a whisper. "The man in the black jacket. He was standing by my car. I swear he was just there, watching." I turned away for a second and he was gone. A chill ran down my spine. "You sure you're not just seeing things? It's late." "I know what I saw," he said. We didn't speak for the next 20 miles. He just sat there, eyes fixed on the mirror. Eventually I saw lights ahead, one of those tiny 24-hour diners with a gas station beside it. I figured it'd be a good place to drop him. As I pulled in, I glanced over to say something, but the seat was empty. My foot slammed the brake. The truck jerked to a halt. The passenger door was still closed. No one had opened it. No sound, no movement. I swear on my life, he had been sitting there the whole ride. I could smell his sweat, hear his breathing, and now he was gone. I climbed out, heart hammering, and looked around. No sign of him. I even asked the cashier inside the diner if she'd seen someone walk in. "Nope," she said. "You're the first person I've seen in hours." I got back in the truck and just sat there, breathing hard, gripping the wheel like it was the only thing anchoring me to reality. I didn't know what had just happened, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it was, it hadn't left. I could still feel something in the air, like static, heavy and wrong. I drove on through the rest of Arizona, trying not to look in the mirrors anymore. The fog followed me, thicker now, moving like tendrils. Around 6 a.m., the sky was beginning to pale at the edges. I saw a sign for a truck stop with showers and parking. I figured I'd rest for an hour, try to shake the weirdness. The parking lot was nearly empty. I found a spot near the edge, shut off the engine, and leaned back in the sleeper cab. I didn't plan to sleep, just to close my eyes for a bit, but I must have dozed off, because I woke up to a sound that made my blood run cold. fingernails scraping against the driver's side window. Not a knock, a scrape, long and slow. I sat bolt upright, my heart pounding. The window was fogged from inside, but I could make out a faint shape, tall, unmoving. I didn't dare breathe. The scraping continued for a few more seconds. Then silence. I reached for the curtain and pulled it aside. No one was there, just the empty parking lot and the orange morning breaking over the horizon. But there were marks. Thin, jagged lines carved into the condensation on the glass, like someone had written something with their fingernail. I leaned closer and read the message. Still watching. I didn't stay. I started the truck and floored it out of that lot, panic buzzing in my veins like caffeine. The rest of the drive was a blur. I didn't eat, didn't stop, barely even blinked. The CB stayed silent. No more static, no more whispers, just the hum of the engine and the distant roar of wind against the cab. I made the delivery in Bakersfield ahead of schedule, signed the papers with shaking hands, and parked at a depot motel to crash. I thought maybe I'd hallucinated everything. Lack of sleep, long drive, maybe something in the coffee. That's what I told myself anyway. But that night, in the motel bed, I woke up to the same sound. Scraping. Only this time it wasn't at the window. It was at the door. Slow, deliberate, like someone dragging their nails across the wood. I crept toward it, not making a sound. When I looked through the peephole, there was no one there. But in the morning, when I opened the door, I saw it, carved into the wood at eye level, still watching. Story the end.
Story number 8.
I started trucking in 2008, fresh out of a failing marriage and desperate to put miles between me and the wreckage I left behind. There's something intoxicating about the road when you've got nothing tethering you. The long hours, the hum of tires on pavement, the isolation, it can either be healing or hollow. Maybe both. I stuck with it because I liked the silence, or I thought I did. In late 2016, I picked up a load of bulk grain from a mill in Kansas, headed for a feed operation just west of Amarillo, Texas. A simple overnight trip. I left at sunset, hoping to miss the daytime traffic and make better time. The dispatch route was a straight shot, but around midnight, the GPS rerouted me to a state road that cut diagonally across a patch of the Panhandle. I don't usually trust detours that late at night, but I'd been on that road before. SR 91. 2 lanes, no lights, no towns, and mostly empty fields on either side. Nothing unusual. I'd made that drive before. About 45 miles into that stretch, the radio began to cut out. Not like usual static, but small, intentional-sounding snippets, like whispers. I was scanning through channels trying to find a signal, and for a second I swear I heard a voice say, "Stop the truck. Clear. Male. Calm." I sat there, hands tightening around the wheel, unsure if I'd imagined it. Maybe it was some bleeding signal from a distant channel. I killed the radio. The road ahead was black but smooth, just that narrow cone of visibility from my headlights and the occasional reflective post whizzing by. After a few minutes, I saw a set of blinking hazard lights in the distance. Another rig pulled off to the shoulder. No movement. Just sitting there, a soft orange glow from the blinkers like some kind of low-frequency alarm. Normally I'd pass without a second thought, but something about the way it sat felt wrong. Like it hadn't been driven there, more like it had been placed. Still, instinct and habit made me slow down as I approached. The driver's side door was open. That's not something any trucker does unless they're right outside, especially not out in the middle of nowhere in winter. I slowed to a crawl and leaned toward my passenger window, scanning for movement. Nothing. The inside of the cab was dark. I considered stopping to check, maybe radio for help, but then I saw something in the road. About 30 yards past the truck, just at the edge of my headlights, was a shape. It looked like a man crawling on hands and knees, slowly, unnaturally. His limbs moved like they weren't used to bending, like someone who had forgotten how to walk. I could just make out a tattered pair of jeans and what might have been a shirt, but it hung off him like it didn't fit. And his head, it was tilted too far to one side, the way a head only tilts when the neck is broken or barely holding on. I didn't stop. I don't care how heartless that sounds. I mashed the accelerator and passed it going 70 within seconds. As I flew by, I looked in the side mirror. The figure had stopped crawling and was standing, or something like standing. Bent legs, crooked arms, and that head, it was tilted upward, staring directly into my rear view as if it had been waiting for me. I didn't sleep that night. I kept the rig moving until I reached a well-lit truck stop just outside Amarillo and parked under one of the floodlights. My hands were still shaking. I didn't even bother sleeping in the sleeper. I locked the doors, climbed into the passenger seat, and kept watch out the windshield like a soldier on guard. The next morning, I checked the news, thinking maybe someone else had seen it or reported an abandoned truck out on SR 91. Nothing. Not a whisper. I considered calling it in, but what would I say? Hey, there's a possessed Gumby impersonator crawling around near mile marker 48. It sounded insane, even in my own head. I made the delivery and headed back toward Kansas the next day, this time during daylight and on a different route. The dispatcher didn't say anything about it. No record of delays. Nothing unusual. I kept quiet. I didn't hit that stretch of SR 91 again for over a year. Even when jobs would route near it, I'd make excuses or add extra miles. The memory had faded just enough to sit in the back of my mind, like a bad dream you remember halfway through the day. Until April 2018. Dispatch sent me to pick up a load of dry goods in Lubbock with a delivery in Salina, Kansas. I didn't even notice the routing until it was too late. By the time I realized I was back on SR 91, the sun had already dipped low and the sky was dimming. I thought about turning back, rerouting, anything. But a weird part of me wanted to prove that I'd imagined it all, that it had been a trick of fatigue and shadows. Around 10:30 p.m., I passed the spot where I remembered seeing the other truck. No sign of it now, no evidence anyone had ever broken down there. But then my low fuel light flicked on. I cursed. I'd filled up before the run, but hadn't accounted for the long, idle time at the last stop. I pulled over to check the auxiliary tank readings. That's when I heard the tapping. Not from outside the cab, inside. From the back. 3 soft taps like fingernails on glass. I froze, every muscle locking up. My sleeper was dark and the curtain was drawn, but I hadn't heard the door open and I was certain it had been locked. I reached slowly under my seat for the tire iron I kept there. Another tap, closer this time, higher up, like it had moved toward the small window behind the bed. I twisted around and yanked the curtain open. Nothing. Just the empty sleeper compartment. The smell of stale coffee and cheap plastic, but my gut said something was wrong. I climbed back into the driver's seat and restarted the engine. As I adjusted the mirror, my blood turned to ice. In the reflection of the side sleeper window, I saw a hand. Not a whole body, just a hand. Pale, with fingers longer than they should have been. They were pressed against the glass from the outside, like someone or something was hanging onto the cab. The skin looked almost translucent. No hair, no fingernails, just 5 long, wet-looking fingers splayed across the window like they were tasting the truck. I didn't think. I floored it. As the truck roared forward, I heard a high-pitched scraping sound against the side panel, like nails across aluminum. I swerved hard, trying to throw it off, whatever it was. After a few hundred yards, the noise stopped. I didn't slow down for the rest of the trip. I skipped my sleep break, drove until my eyes blurred, and pulled into a mechanic station just outside Salina. I claimed engine trouble, had them do a full inspection, didn't tell them what I was really looking for. They found nothing. No dents, no scratches, no signs that anything had even touched the truck. But I saw it. I heard it. That was the last time I ever drove SR 91. I don't care how much money is on the load or how tight the schedule is. There's something wrong with that stretch of highway. Something there. And I'm not the only one. Later that year, I talked to a younger driver named Kevin. He was green, maybe 6 months in, still had that sparkle in his eyes. He overheard me telling a toned-down version of the story at a stop in Tulsa and pulled me aside later. Said he saw something near that same area, SR 91, about a week before. His description was nearly identical. A crawling figure, bent limbs, weird movements, black, empty roads. Only difference was, his didn't stay outside the truck. He'd stopped for a piss break at a wide shoulder, engine running, hazards on. When he climbed back into the cab, he heard breathing behind him. Turned around and there was someone in the sleeper, curled into the corner. Not a man, not even really a person. Just a shape, hunched and shivering with its face hidden in its arms. Kevin screamed, opened the door, and jumped out, breaking his ankle in the fall. When he looked up, the cab was empty again. He quit 2 weeks later. Said he couldn't sleep in the truck anymore. Couldn't be alone. He was 23 years old. I've talked to enough people since then to know it's not just me. There's no record of accidents or missing persons from SR 91, at least not any public ones. But those of us who've driven long enough, we hear the whispers. Stories passed between drivers like contraband. Some say it's the land, that it was cursed long before the road was built. Others think it's some kind of predator, something that waits in silence for vulnerable people, lonely, tired, half awake. One driver swore it followed him, said even after he stopped driving SR 91, he'd see shadows on other roads, things in the corner of his mirrors. He told me he started leaving his dash cam running all night. One morning, he reviewed the footage and saw something staring through the windshield while he slept, a pale face just barely visible in the glare. He deleted the video and threw away the camera. There's a weight you carry after seeing something you can't explain. It makes you question every shadow, every noise, every strange whisper on a dead radio channel. It follows you, not just in memory, but in the way you start to see the world. Like a thin sheet has been peeled back, just enough to show the cracks in everything. I still drive, still log miles every week, but I check my mirrors more often. I don't drive with the sleeper curtain closed anymore, and I never, under any circumstances, stop on empty highways after dark. Because I don't think what I saw is limited to SR 91. I think that road is just one of many. There are cracks all over this country, small, forgotten stretches where the world thins and something else slips through. And once you've seen it, you're never really alone again. Story the end.
Story number 9.
I've been driving trucks for over 15 years now, long enough to know the difference between the kind of weird that happens on the road and the kind that shouldn't happen anywhere. The kind that gets under your skin and makes you feel like you left something behind, maybe your sanity, or maybe something worse. This happened in the fall of 2017 during a solo long haul from Salt Lake City to Billings. I was subcontracting for a logistics company that specialized in overnight cold chain deliveries. Medical supplies, mostly. I didn't ask what was in the trailer, I never did. As long as the seals were intact and the drop location matched, it was none of my business. And at the time, I needed the money bad. The dispatch had come in late, almost 8:45 p.m., with a promised bonus if I could get the trailer delivered by morning. It was cutting it close, but I figured I could shave time off by skipping most of my breaks and sleeping once I hit Montana. I stopped just outside Ogden for fuel, topped off the thermos with gas station coffee that tasted like scorched tires, and hit I-15 with the cab heater rattling at full blast. It was around 11:30 p.m. when I crossed into Idaho and the road had gone quiet. Not dead, just quiet in that unsettling way where the headlights carve out your whole world, and the rest of the universe might as well not exist. There's a loneliness to nighttime driving that I usually don't mind. It's just you, the road, and the sound of rubber humming along the asphalt. But that night, the silence didn't feel peaceful. It felt like something was waiting. I first noticed it about halfway through the Malad Gorge stretch. The trailer began to sway. Not hard, but just enough that I had to fight the wheel a bit more than usual. The wind wasn't up, and the tires were new. It didn't make sense. At first, I thought maybe the load was imbalanced, but that wouldn't explain the strange tug, like something inside was shifting, subtly, rhythmically, with its own pulse. I glanced in the side mirror, expecting to see a loose door or something dragging, but the trailer was sealed, lights steady, tires all intact. But then, I saw something. There was a figure. At first, I thought it was just a shadow cast by the lights or a smear on the mirror. But then I realized it wasn't on the road. It was in the trailer's reflection. A shape standing still, barely visible through the thin slit between the reefer unit and the side wall. Tall, narrow, motionless. I blinked, leaned forward, looked again. Gone. I told myself I was just tired. Highway hypnosis. Long hours and too much caffeine. Happens to everyone eventually. I turned the radio on low to break the silence, but it was mostly static, with bursts of stations bleeding into each other. Church sermons, distant country, emergency weather reports for counties I'd never heard of. A few minutes later, I passed a small rest area. the kind with 2 broken vending machines and a half-lit bathroom shelter. I didn't plan on stopping, but my guts started churning like someone had tied a knot inside them. It wasn't just nerves, it was something deeper, a physical pressure that made my skin go cold and my mouth dry. I pulled in. There was only one other vehicle, a maroon SUV with its lights off and no visible occupants. I parked near the edge of the lot, engine running, and climbed down. The moment my boots hit the pavement, I noticed how quiet it was. No wind, no bugs, not even the usual distant hum of traffic. I walked to the restroom. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed like angry wasps, one flickering so badly it cast twitching shadows on the walls. I locked the stall door and sat elbows on my knees, trying to breathe slow and ignore the sinking feeling in my stomach. And then the sound started. Footsteps, slow, crunching across gravel. They stopped outside the building. A moment passed, then the main door creaked open. I held my breath. Heavy boots on the concrete floor. Deliberate, slow, walking past the stalls. Then they stopped. Right outside mine. I could see shadows beneath the door, 2 feet motionless, facing inward, not shifting, not pacing, just waiting. My heart thudded so loud I thought they'd hear it. A hand reached under the door. Just the tips of long, gray fingers, dirty with cracked nails. Not grabbing, just pressing against the tile, like they were feeling for something. I nearly screamed. The fingers curled slightly, then pulled back. A moment later, the footsteps walked away, back toward the entrance. The door creaked. Silence. I waited 5 minutes before I dared move. When I finally unlocked the stall and stepped out, there was no one there. Just the buzzing lights and the lingering stench of ammonia. I checked the mirror. My face looked pale, eyes bloodshot. I splashed cold water on my face and rushed back to the truck. The SUV was gone. I climbed into the cab, locked the doors, and pulled back onto the highway. Every muscle in my body was tensed. I told myself it was some messed up transient or drugged out weirdo, maybe a hitchhiker playing sick games. But I knew that was a lie. The trailer swayed again, a long, slow pull to the right like something had leaned hard against the inside wall. I glanced at the monitor. Cargo temperature was normal, doors still sealed. But I felt it. Whatever was inside, it wasn't cargo. Around 2:15 a.m., I passed through a dead zone with no signal, no towns, no exits for miles. Just high desert, scrub brush, and distant mountain shadows. That's when the lights started. At first, I thought it was another truck behind me. I saw headlights in my mirrors, high, powerful beams, maybe 100 feet back. But when I changed lanes to let them pass, they didn't. They stayed right behind me. No horn, no CB call, just steady, blinding lights. I flashed my hazards, hoping they'd back off. Nothing. I slowed down. They slowed too. Then the lights flickered. Not a simple bulb flicker, more like a digital glitch. Rapid, strobe-like pulses. And with every flash, I thought I saw something between us. Not a vehicle, a shape, walking, crawling, shifting. I floored it. The engine groaned, tires gripping hard. I hit 85, then 90. The lights behind me vanished like someone had snapped them off. But I wasn't relieved, because then I heard something else. Movement inside the cab, not from the trailer. Behind me. I whipped my head around. The sleeper curtain was swaying, barely, like someone had just brushed past it. My hand went for the wrench I kept by the seat. I slowed the truck just enough to swerve onto the shoulder and jammed the brake. I sat there, breathing hard, gripping the wrench, staring at the curtain. Then I heard breathing. Not mine. Slow, wet, like someone with lungs full of fluid. I yanked the curtain aside. Nothing. No one. But the bedding was wrinkled, pressed down, like someone had just been lying there. That was it. I was done. I radioed dispatch and told them I was parking at the next station and abandoning the haul if they didn't reassign it. They were pissed, but I didn't care. I told them the reefer was acting up and I was hallucinating from exhaustion. They agreed to send a second driver to finish it off, told me to leave it at a truck stop near Blackfoot. I pulled in around 4:30 a.m., dead tired, emotionally wrecked. The place was mostly empty except for a few parked rigs and a sleepy attendant behind bulletproof glass. I left the keys with the cashier and scribbled a note on the bill of lading. Seals unbroken, driver switch, trailer intact. Then I got into a rental sedan I'd arranged through dispatch and drove the 3 hours back to Salt Lake, not stopping once. I didn't even go home. I parked in a grocery lot, locked the doors, and slept in the car for 6 hours. I thought maybe that would be the end of it. But the dream started. Every night for 3 weeks, always the same. I'd be in the truck, driving through the dark, when the reefer trailer behind me would creak open, and something tall, thin, and wet would crawl out. No face, just black holes where the eyes should be. It never spoke, just stared through the glass, watching. One morning I woke up to find my front door unlocked. I live alone. I never forget to lock it. Another night, I heard scraping along the hallway floor, like fingernails. I moved. New city. Quit long haul altogether. Now I work local warehouse runs, short hours, bright daylight, but I still check my mirrors every time I drive, because every now and then, just as dusk sets in, I catch a glimpse of a shape behind the trailer, not on the road, inside the reflection, still watching. Story the end.